Hi guys, so today I am going to be working through a few questions that people sent in. So I've got a range of questions looking at anxiety and depression mainly. So I'll work through the questions that people sent in, and if anyone else has any other questions about mental health, then feel free to just drop it in the comments. So I'll start off with the first question was how to have a healthy relationship with your family. And I think with that it can be really tricky because obviously I don't know how kind of your family is, but it's about, I think for you, thinking about what does a healthy relationship mean to you. Even thinking about kind of writing that down, what is a healthy relationship? And maybe writing down the indicators for you of a healthy relationship. And so someone just said about resolving conflicts, and that could be part of having a healthy relationship. So being able to resolve conflicts with family members, and it may be thinking about your boundaries. So thinking about what your boundaries are and what boundaries are important to you. That could be saying no to certain things. It could be limiting the time with your family. So it's really kind of looking at, as I said, what a healthy relationship means to you and thinking about how you can achieve that. And if we're thinking about overcoming conflict within family members, I think it can be really tricky again, and it obviously depends on what the conflict is. One of the things I always find really helpful when trying to resolve conflict is sometimes when we are arguing with someone who won't listen to us or that will often create arguments, it's about thinking about what is worth me having an argument. And you may have a scale, so thinking about if anything is over an 8, then it's worth kind of going into an argument. If it's lower than an 8, maybe thinking about recognizing that and being able to walk away, even though walking away is difficult. But it's about balancing that out, that is it worth having an argument with this person, or can I walk away. And if you are trying to resolve that conflict through having a conversation, it may be about setting some ground rules with the person that you are having that argument with, or trying to have a discussion with and resolve that conflict. So talking about how long you will stay in it. So thinking about, okay, well, let's hear each other out, giving each other both a space to talk. So having that turn taking, and being able to both listen to each other and have those points heard. Again, this isn't always easy and it can take some practice, but even calling a time out, if it's getting too heated or you're both talking over each other, that can make it really difficult. And if you find someone does always talk over you, a trick can be speaking quieter. Because when people, sometimes we echo what we hear. So if someone's shouting and someone else is shouting back, you're just going to get louder and louder. But if you start to reduce the volume, you may notice they start to mirror and they also start to reduce. So there's just some tips in terms of how to have those healthy relationships and also how to resolve conflict. And I think going back to the healthy relationships, as I said, thinking about what that healthy relationship means to you. And if you notice that there's certain situations where conflict arises or that those relationships start to be tested, change the environment. So if you notice that it's always around the dinner table that those arguments happen, thinking about how you could change that, thinking about the position on the table. People are most likely to argue when they're opposite each other or sitting at a dinner table, but they are less likely to argue if they're sitting next to each other. So again, thinking about positions at the dinner table, or if it always happens when you are at a certain place, thinking about having conversations in a different environment. Okay, so I've got some more questions. Okay, so my question is about inner child work. I find the concept very uncomfortable. I equate children to be immature. How do I become more comfortable with it? Nice to meet you too. I think with inner child work, we all have an inner child, and you can try and become more comfortable with it, with noticing things that bring you a childlike joy. And it's not to say that it's immature, but there'll be certain things that make us feel good but may not always be what adults do. So for example, even like colouring in or climbing trees and things like that. And it's about connecting with that inner child. And although it can feel quite uncomfortable to connect with it, and that could be maybe, as you said, because of you equate children to being immature, and children obviously by definition aren't as mature as adults, but there are qualities. So maybe thinking about the qualities of the inner child rather than the inner child itself. That may be helpful to be able to push through the uncomfortableness, and even exploring what that uncomfortableness means to you. Why is that there? What does immaturity mean to you? Does it remind you of anything? So thinking about that. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers a bit that question. I've got a lot of posts coming up talking about inner child work, so hopefully that will be helpful for you. Assertive communication. I don't really know of a book about assertive communication. I'll have a think, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head, unfortunately. Maybe having a look online, sorry, that's not very helpful, but I can't think of any books off the top of my head. So one of the other questions was how depression impacts relationships. Does it make you fall out of love? I thought this question was really interesting because depression can impact so many areas of our lives. It can impact our relationships with loved ones because we either don't enjoy things that you have previously done or things that you do as a couple. And it's about really being open with your partner about if you're experiencing depression and how you experience depression, and being able to have those conversations, and really to, I suppose, to ask them to be able to work through it with you, at least give you time. And the falling out of love part of that question, again, it's so difficult because it can make you doubt things, for sure, if you've got depression, because you're going to be feeling down, you're going to have a lot of negative thoughts, and those negative thoughts could link into your relationships. So I think by thinking about, does it make you fall out of love, thinking about what does that actually mean to you? What do you mean by falling out of love? Is it because you don't enjoy the activities, which again could be due to the depression? Could it be due to the negative thoughts, which again could be due to the depression? So trying to explore that relationship. And if you think it would be helpful to speak to someone, a professional, about that, to help you distinguish between what is a depression talking and what's me talking. Even though the depression is still part of you, there is some distinction. So I think being able to explore that with a qualified professional would be helpful. But just be aware that, be kind to yourself. Depression's really, really hard, and it is bound to make changes in relationships and create difficulties when they may have not been there before, but trying to be easy on yourself and challenging those negative thoughts and asking that partner to support you potentially. Often when I work with depression, when we get to a point, we get close others involved in the therapy, so we get them to do activities that they agree to do together, because part of sometimes the treatment for depression is about changing what you're doing or altering what you're doing, and the behaviour side of things, that's more like the behavioural activation, and we often get partners, close friends, family members involved in that, so that could be something good to look at. Just had a question about inner child work. I think Jeffrey Young, looking at the schema element of inner child, can be really, really helpful. That will be I'm reading the book at the moment, which is called Reinventing Your Life by Jeffrey Young, which is really, really good. That would be the one that I can first think of at the top of my head. But there are loads of different books that you can find. Hopefully that'll be helpful. I can't concentrate, study due to breakup. I think with breakups, there's a grieving period. When we break up with people, we grieve, and we have to go through that grieving process, which can include anger, which can include frustration, which can include sadness, the disbelief. So I know it's difficult to study. I always use a Pomodoro technique when I'm studying, which is where you set a timer for 20 minutes and you break for 5, study for 20. And that just allows that break, but be strict with yourself. Have literally like a countdown, have a timer, but also give yourself permission to heal from a breakup and allow yourself to go through the processes that you would do normally if you were grieving. So one of the other questions, and I'll read both of the questions, but they do link together. So why does anxiety feel so involuntary? And then why is everything so triggering with anxiety? And what I wanted to explain with that is that when we experience anxiety, there are changes that goes on in our brain which makes it feel really involuntary. So you have the amygdala, which actually can grow in size when you experience anxiety and depression. And the amygdala is the part that is always scanning for threat. It's always kind of making sure that you're safe. It's part of the old brain because it's right in the middle, and then we've kind of got the newer, more developed brains which has kind of come on the outside. But this old brain used to be there when we were kind of cavemen and women, thinking that we needed to protect ourselves from threat. But that part hasn't really changed much. So we are constantly looking for threat, and when we feel anxious, we are looking for threat because we feel like we are in threat. So the amygdala actually grows in size, which is why it can feel so involuntary, because it's what's going on within our brain. But also when we're looking at the hippocampus actually shrinks when we are experiencing anxiety and depression actually. And the hippocampus is to do with our learning and our memory. So if you think you've got this part of your brain which is kind of making you really, really looking out for threat and really aware of what's going on for you, then there's got this other part which has got smaller, which is the part where you can learn and that you can retain information. So that's why it makes it so difficult sometimes with anxiety and depression to be able to overcome things, because you've got those parts of your brain which has expanded because of what you're experiencing and looking for that threat. But then it's really difficult for you to actually be able to learn that you can overcome those perceived threats because that part of your brain has actually shrunk in size. So that is why it can feel so involuntary, and that's also why you can be triggered to so many things, because the amygdala is overactive. So it's constant, as I said, it's constantly looking for threat, it's constantly working. So we are triggered so much easier because we've got all of these things working on inside of us. So it's about being able to slow down your nervous system, whether that's through breathing, meditation, just stuff to kind of slow that down, which will give you that space to really look at what these triggers are and being able to see them in a more rational light. And again, when we experience anxiety, things can feel a lot more threatening, or they can feel a lot more overwhelming than what they actually are. And that is kind of when we're triggered. So we could be triggered when we go to a supermarket, we could be triggered in conversations. So it's about being aware of our triggers and being able to relax ourselves and learn that we can deal with those situations. With anxiety, as soon as we're triggered, we often want to run away and leave that situation, and so we avoid it. But by avoiding, then your anxiety drops right down, and you don't actually get a chance to learn that you can sit in that situation and you'll be okay. So that's why it's important that when we do avoid situations, trying our best not to avoid situations so we can learn that we can deal with it. Anxiety can only stay for a peak in your body for about 20 minutes. And so if you're able to ride those 20 minutes out, your anxiety is going to go down, and then you can learn, okay, well, I can stay in this situation. Rather, when you avoid it, the anxiety drops, but you don't learn that you'll actually be okay. So the last question is it possible to live without anxiety and depression? And quite simply, the answer is yes. But when we're in it, it can feel really, really difficult. And I think it's being really important, being kind to yourself and being able to learn what helps you, what doesn't, what triggers you, what makes you feel good, and seeking professional support if you need it. There's always professionals out there that are able to help you through anxiety and depression, obviously, and a range of other mental health difficulties. But just to say, it is possible to live without it. It's not a lifelong condition. For some people, it can go on for many years before getting treatment, and sometimes it can peak and then it can drop off. But when you go through therapy, particularly with CBT, you learn the skills to become your own therapist. So you would be able to manage life without it. So yes, it is possible to live a life without anxiety and depression. As I said, even if it doesn't feel like it at that point, it is, I promise. So that is all the questions that I had for today. Thank you everyone for joining me, and thanks, someone said that's informative, that's great. As I've said last week, I'm going to be trying to do more lives on a Wednesday, and I will always ask questions on my story just to kind of get a range of questions from my followers, so I make sure that I'm kind of answering what you want to know, and kind of making it suitable for you. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I hope if you're in the UK, you're staying cool. I'm sure it's hot in many other countries. But yes, I hope you have a good rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. And as I said, thank you for those that joining me, and I'm glad that you found it helpful, and hopefully I will see you guys next week. Okay? Right, take care and look after yourself.